on a Thursday. It's always a Thursday. Welcome, everybody. How are we doing?
Good.
Luke, Jordy from Bespoke Motor Cars joining us again. Thank you, mate. How you been?
Awesome, thanks. Enjoying our big second lockdown here in Melbourne. It's created chaos for all of my plans, but it's given me a bit of extra time to come and join you fellas and see if I can wax lyrical about things that I barely understand and just have a bit of fun. But yeah, look, no, things are good. We were still managing to do a bit of business in the midst of this global chaos, and the family's great, and it's all, yeah, we're chugging along okay. Yeah, cheers.
I must admit, Jordy, the last time we had you on the podcast, you were discussing in depth the story of your XJR-15 build and restoration, which is episode 2 for those listening that want to go and catch up. It's a brilliant, fascinating chat. But I remember you saying at the time that was the first lockdown that we managed to get you, and you sort of were commenting that it was good to have some time with the family and actually have some time. And I saw that, what are you, day 2, day 3 of this new lockdown, and already on your Instagram today, up in the ATV with the kids tearing around the farm. So I think if there's a silver lining.
Yeah, look, I'm still doing, a fair bit of work, and I've also managed to get some projects up here at the farm to tinker with and keep going with, and I'm still spending a big chunk of my time in Melbourne, but I'm definitely getting a chance to, just because I'm a little bit afraid of mixing with the public as much, because it's, things are starting to actually sort of accelerate with the rates of transmission with the virus here in Melbourne. I'm not doing as many sort of public things as I have been. So yeah, it's awesome to, we've got that little Polaris little off-road buggy thing that we got, and yeah, just grab my little 2-year-old and 5-year-old Hugh and Harry and smash around the farm here. We got my mother-in-law's got 7 acres here on the farm, and we have an absolute ball. In fact, I just got out of the shower from washing all the mud off us. It's it's pretty awesome.
Amazing. So look, for those watching in brief, we're going to catch up on what we've been up to the last sort of week, and then we're going to loosely delve in with Jordy into sort of GT3 cars. He's obviously had a fair bit of awesome experience owning and driving and working on a selection, so we're going to kind of run through and sort of get Jordy to explain to us, we sort of think GT3 is GT3, but like everything, it is not. There is a lot of difference. So we're going to discuss how the cars have evolved and where they're heading from now. So if you do have any questions about GT3 cars or anything else automotive, pop it in the chat, and we'll put it to Jordy. But yeah, Luke, how have you been? Are those issue 3s flying out the door?
Yeah, enjoying being a mailman. So spent a fair bit of the time over the last week just dealing with all the online orders. Thank you very much to everyone who's been popping through some stuff online, which is pretty cool. And good to see him flying out the door. Sent a few around to a few different stores as well around the country, which will pop up on the Instagram. But Benzin Cafe in Castle Hill or Dural, New Line Road in Dural in New South Wales has got some in stock now. DS in Sydney should have some available pretty soon. And hopefully if Melbourne get out of lockdown, we can get some around Melbourne too.
DS is, because for uneducated bogans like me, we call it deuce. When we started saying DS, I was like, what's DS? What? I've seen Citroen letters and stuff, but what's DS? So
I think Andrew's the one that keeps correcting me on that, and at the start, no, Luke, it's DS.
got my hat from Biarritz. I'm a believer. Yeah, it's I don't know. I've bought into it. I love it, and Phoenix, the store manager up in Sydney, he's been awesome in Camperdown. Is stocking sports car safari for us. So yeah, as soon as obviously Australia Post is in a little bit of chaos at the moment, but hopefully the magazine should land soon, and we'll be sure to post on it on social. So
I think your box is still sitting in Melbourne, waiting to find a flight to get over as well. So,
mate, we're going to be into issue 4 before I actually see my issue 3, and I'll be excited about it probably 6 weeks after everyone else has done it. But all good.
It'll get there. Yeah. And what else? Yeah. So just really been pushing on that and playing mailman. I actually have enjoyed the process of doing that. One of the things I like about, just the look and the feel of the thing. I've actually been stamping every single package that goes out, apart from some of the bigger ones where people have been ordering merch, which is really cool. All the magazine stuff I put stamps on, which is like, I don't know, like a bit of a therapeutic process, just kind of going through old world stuff. Haven't been handwriting it though, because I work in IT and my handwriting is probably no better than my 8-year-old's, but definitely the stamps has been fun. What's been happening with you, Andrew? How's the shit Boxster going?
The shit Boxster, mate, it's going well, and I must say I feel a little bit embarrassed talking about this with Jordy on the chat as well, because sports. So for those that aren't aware, Jordy runs Bespoke Motor Cars, and in issue 3 of Sports Car Safari, our cover story, the Murcielago R-GT, the most epic restoration story I think I've heard in a very long time. Jordy told us in long form. So when I talk about my struggle to get a wheel nut off, I feel rather humbled to be discussing that in this company. But yeah, no, it's going well. So for those that aren't aware, I bought, we've sort of discussed it on previous podcasts, but I bought literally the cheapest Porsche in the UK, and everyone said there's no such thing as a cheap Porsche. And the other one I kind of like is kind of like boats. It's like the 2 best days of Porsche ownership, cheap Porsche ownership, are the day you buy it and the day you sell it. And I definitely had a great day that I bought it. So waiting to see how the rest turns out. But no, going well. The cleared some leaks. There was some leaks into the cabin, which were a bit concerning. So I've cleared them, and it's been raining because it's the UK and that's what it does. And the interior has remained dry. So that's a win. The next one was a bit defeatist. I set the car up. I needed to put new brakes in it and do a service. So got it around the other day and got it jacked up, and I was really excited. Got the tools out, got the music out, and I was like, all right, let's get stuck into it. And the wheel nuts, I couldn't budge them at all. They were just so tight, and I jumping on them, and then it had
how long was your breaker bar?
Not long enough. This is a lesson. Yeah, it was not long enough. And I guess the lesson I learned is partially you do need the right tools. And I'm sure Jordy will go into this, but I think I did learn a lesson that they were a lot tighter than I expected. And I managed to break the locking wheel nut tool. They've got the wheel nut tools. And for those that aren't aware, the car has sat outside for 3 years and hasn't been touched. So I just kind of assumed that the wheel nuts were rusted solid in there, and that, and I was sort of a bit nervous, like, oh man, if the wheel nuts are this bad, the rest of the car is just going to be a nightmare to try and deal with. So yesterday got a wheel nut specialist. He's a locking wheel nut specialist removal business to come up, because I've broken the tool and I thought I just want them off, and whatever. 135 pounds, and they guaranteed to remove the 3 nuts, and that was a guarantee, which they were the only company that would guarantee to get them off and all that. So I'm thinking, okay, this is cool. And then the guy turns up in an 18-month-old Range Rover Sport supercharged V8 with the white leather interior, jumps out. He's wearing a gold watch, gold chains, and he's not in work clothes at all.
Mechanic then.
Exactly. And I'm like, okay. So pops the boot open, gets these tools, which I will happy to admit that, I mean, he can charge the money because he has the tools, which are very expensive. They're proper carbon tungstide removal tools, and he knows what he's doing. So I'm not whinging, but yeah, gets the tools out the boot, walks around, takes, I reckon, about 6 minutes, and crack, 3 of them off. 135 pounds. It's got the FBOSS machine in the back seat of the car. Drives off 10 minutes later, and I'm going, that's why he's in a Range Rover. And anyway, but so the wheel nuts are off, and work can continue, which as soon as I think once we finish the podcast, I'm gonna jump back out and continue pretending to be a mechanic again. So yeah, all good. We've also already started planning the first road trip in the car, 5 weeks time, which is probably not a smart thing to do, given I haven't actually confirmed that this thing really drives properly yet. And we're already kind of booking a trip to Europe in it, but hey ho.
Gotta have a deadline. Got to have a deadline, Jordy, right?
Exactly.
Got it.
I learn from the best.
book the trip and the shipping and the everything, so you have something to work to.
There is an option.
Yeah.
So
cool.
yeah. So it's all going well.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, so I guess we're going to go through a bit of the GT3 history and where it goes and where it starts, because we were kind of, Andrew and I both were talking and went, oh, lockdown in Melbourne, what's Jordy doing? Great, who have time. and then we're just trying to kind of spitball ideas about what we're going to chat about. And it was really interesting because Jordy's had some exposure to varying range of GT cars that he's owned and worked on and driven. And just to see the development of that and the development of that series and where it came from, we think is a pretty cool thing to share and do. And there's not many people, I guess, unless you've worked in the industry in a race team, have really had the exposure across all of it, like Jordy has. So I guess, Jordy, like, what, you want to start from the beginning? How did this series come about? And where did it go?
Preface this by saying I'm certainly not in the business of motor racing. I'm just very, very fortunate that in the background of what I do for a living, with my business, we do procurement, sales, restoration service of the most special cars that we can find. And just sort of in the background of all of this, I'm very, very lucky to play with these cars and restore them and enjoy them. But I'm certainly not in the business of racing them. So this is probably a very unique perspective, because most of the people that deal with these cars actually race them. They race them wheel to wheel as a matter of business. So I'm in the business of finding them and preserving them, but enjoying them and making sure they're out and being seen. So I don't deal with the new ones. I deal with the more historic ones and the more notable ones, the ones that were made in quite few numbers and are a bit special. But getting to sort of the GT3 formula. So it all really sort of started with a guy called Stéphane Rattel, a very, very notable French racing personality. So he was one of the fathers of GT1. Before it was the FIA GT Championship, it was a series called BPR. So, that was where the McLaren F1 was introduced to racing. And, it's the stuff of legend. Most people argue it's the apex of modern motor racing. It was the greatest racing that you'll ever see is, McLaren F1s, Porsche 911 GT1s, just all the most awesome stuff, all battling it out together. And that was BPR. And it was so successful that FIA took it over and made it into FIA GT1. So Stéphane Rattel was one of the founding fathers of that, and basically spawned this new golden age of GT racing. And as it always is sort of want to do, it becomes an arms race. Big manufacturers get involved, and it gets to the point where it's so unsustainable it eats itself, which is exactly what happened. And it happens in 10-year cycles. It just happens time and time again with just about every racing championship that is a good championship and has the right formula. It becomes a victim of its own success, and that's what happened to GT1. But you had Stéphane Rattel. He sort of, and I could be wrong, this is my understanding of it, he wanted to create a formula where it was, very much like the existing classes of GT1 and GT2, but most of the sizzle, most of the pop, most of the bang and the glamour and excitement of all these Ferraris and Porsches and Lamborghinis and whatever racing together. But most of the sort of intense technical complication that creates this expense that no one from the public that watches the racing sort of gets to see, experience, or enjoy, or even understand. Take that away, simplify the championship. Even at that point, GT2 cars were sort of getting up towards €1 million at that point, and they've got ceramic wheel bearings, just unobtainium, everything. And you were pulling them down and completely rebuilding them after every racing event. So he came up with the idea of creating GT3, so the next rung on the ladder below, which would be far more sort of closely related to the road-going cars on which they were derived. Initially you had manufacturers like Lamborghini and Aston Martin and Maserati get interested in the championship because it presented a great way for the marques to promote themselves by selling these factory-built race cars that were they technically weren't factory-built, but they were factory-sanctioned race cars, and getting gentleman drivers to pay for all of their promotion. So, it's the ultimate sort of thing for someone else to pay for you to promote your own brand. And that sort of created, customer racing was already a thing, but GT3 made customer racing into a serious business where wealthy people buy these GT3 cars and pay a large team or a large organisation to run them and procure, all the parts, the spares, and even cook them lunch at the racetrack. Everything covered. So Lamborghini got involved. They'd already, if you remember, we were talking about in the current issue of the magazine, Ryder Engineering. They'd already had a relationship with Lamborghini from doing the GT1 R-GT. So Lamborghini continued on that relationship and developed in conjunction with the factory. They developed the Gallardo LP520 GT3 car, which was a pretty cool car, and it was quite quick. You had ProDrive already had an existing relationship with Aston Martin, so they, of course, were a natural fit to create the GT3 version of the DB9, which was called the DBRS9. And they already had the GT1 DB9 out there racing, which was, of course, the DBR9. So they basically took the DBR9 GT1 car and dumbed it down. So H-pattern gearbox that was derived from the standard Graziano transaxle, took most of the aero away, a much shorter front splitter, a much smaller rear wing, and the engine was far, far, far more closely related to a standard DB. So this is a perfect example. So this was the first DBRS 9 I owned. That's a picture of me the day I bought it in Hong Kong. So that's chassis 11 of 26 cars, and that's a really early spec car. So you can see, looking at the front duckbill there on the aero there, you've got it's sort of quite short. It's about half the size of a GT1 DBR9, and
it looks like an off-the-shelf body kit type thing. It doesn't look like a bespoke kind of aero package for a race car, really.
No. Yeah, no, look, so that was all that front bar, believe it or not, is straight off the DBR9. So they sort of cheated. They took a whole bunch of the panels, like the front guards, or in England you'd call them the front wings, where the headlights are, and that whole panel going back over the wheels. That is literally a GT1 part, so that's a DBR9 part. So they pretty much took the DBR9 and dumbed it right down to a point where it was palatable for the for FIA to homologate it as a GT3 car rather than the GT1 car that it already was.
Jordy, can I ask a quick question for you there? Yeah. Just so when you're comparing the GT1 to the GT3, as so you're saying sort of the gentleman kind of owners and drivers, in real terms, running that for a season, how is that cheaper and more simpler than a GT1 car? Like, what sort of things do you not have to do on that car that you would have to do on a GT3 car? Or is it just that it's just not as fast?
No, look, there's a massive amount of difference. And that's why you've got guys that are sick of the expense of running GT1 cars in historic racing that are now starting to look at cars like the DBRS9, because a DBR9 has to have its water and oil preheated before you start it. So, even before you want to fire the thing up, you've got to start like a 60-minute ritual of warming everything up and getting everything prepped, and plugging in the laptop and getting everything all set up before you can even think about starting it. Whereas a DBR9, you literally just jump in it, make sure it's got enough battery voltage, and flick the switch, and off you go. So there's much less of what I call sort of unobtainium, exotic materials and very tight tolerance bearings and things that all need to be within an optimum temperature range to function at a sort of at a nominal rate. So the DBRS9 is a great example because it's a car that existed as a GT1 car and as a GT3 car, and looking at the way that initially they took all the fruity great stuff away from the GT1 car to make it the DBRS9. It had 5-stud wheels, for example. This is exactly what Stefan Rattel intended for the class, for it to be, very closely aligned with the road cars. Just basically road cars with a little bit more power, a bit more, a decent amount of aero, some slick tires, and a roll cage, basically.
Because they weren't like endurance racing to start off with. From memory. They were more like short sprint races, and like a couple of them over a weekend and stuff.
Sure. Your average gentleman driver was not very well sort of suited towards endurance racing. But then you start to see, and it's when we sort of start to talk about different generations of GT3 cars. the DBRS9 is a great example because it starts off as a pure first generation GT3 car with minimal aero, 5-stud wheels, a H-pattern gearbox, and a relatively simple car and relatively affordable to run. You can see that as time has gone on, and what we were just talking about with motor racing, with any successful racing formula becoming a victim of its own success, it becomes an arms race, and the DBRS9 was no exception. As it went on, we go to the second DBRS9 that I also owned, which was the very last car made, which was chassis 26. That is much, much, much closer to the GT1 version of the car. So it gradually, over a period of about 5 years, creeped back to a GT1 specification, to the point where most of the aero is GT1 on the DBRS9 at the end. It has a straight cut sequential Hollinger gearbox, which is actually Australian made. It was pretty awesome to have, and a big company like a big OEM racing company like ProDrive and Aston Martin Racing choosing an Australian manufacturer to supply the transmission. And center lock wheels, big front duckbill that was all straight off the GT1 car. All of the dive planes and the front splitter, even the rear wing. And it was one of the first cars to have a flexi wing where above a certain loading, the rear wing flexes in the middle and stalls itself out to lose drag. So, even you can see if you zoom in on this picture, this is to the point of this being the last car made, had a lot of GT1 parts on it that were technically a bit sneaky. If we zoom in on the windscreen, just go up a little bit, you can see this is a brand new screen that we're putting in the car at the time. So that's a plexiglass heated screen made by a company. You'll see the logo there on the protective decal called Isoclima Aerospace. So that's a full laminated heated polycarbonate windscreen from a company in Italy that specializes in making windows for aircraft. So instead of it being a $1,500 DB9 windscreen that was in the other car, the white car chassis 11, here on chassis 26, you've got a €6,000 plexiglass, all for the sake of saving a couple of kilograms. Just crazy. So you can see
it does well with bird strikes, though.
Bird strikes. But it got to the point where I was so afraid of scratching it. We had three layers of tear offs on that screen, because I'll be buggered if I'm paying €6,000 for another screen.
So, Jordy, what's the difference around? So, did these cars, did the GT3 and the GT1, you correct me on my history here, did they ever, at a race like the Le Mans 24 Hours of Le Mans, did they ever race side by side? And if they did around the same track, what was the difference in lap time? Do you know what did between at the end?
No, they never raced side by side. My car was quite unique in that it wasn't actually built to run GT3. It was built to run a one-off race as part of the Intercontinental Le Mans Championship in China, where it actually ran against LMP cars and all sorts of crazy stuff, but it never technically raced against a GT1 version of itself. But in terms of lap times, a late car wouldn't be vastly slower. They actually make slightly more power because the GT1 cars, although they're a much more technically sophisticated car, they run restrictors to suit the maximum power output that's mandated in GT1. So a GT3 late spec car, what they call a G-spec engine, actually makes more power than a GT1 version of the same car because it doesn't run restrictors. So couple that with the fact that you've got most of the same aero. The only thing you're lacking really is the rear diffuser of a GT1 car. Pretty much the same rubber. And mostly the same chassis. They even run the same roll cage. They use all the same homologated rollover protection structure from the GT1 to the GT3 car. So, they're not that far apart. Aero-wise, the GT1 car was slightly superior, but from a power and engine perspective, the GT3 car at the very end was a better car. So, maybe the GT1 car would be 1 or 2 seconds a lap quicker, but it wouldn't be showing a clean pair of heels at all. It'd be fairly similar.
I see what you mean. It's completely got well away from the whole point of making a simplified, slower version of GT1. Yeah,
it's crazy. Yeah, because to run the GT3 car would be around a quarter of running the GT1 car, and that's a great example of needless complication. Creating these cars that are so technically, they're absolute tour de forces of machines. And and you're doing all of this great stuff, and then you're restricting the power back for some strange reason rather than just letting everybody run unrestricted. And you end up with cars that are barely any faster than things that look the same and cost, roughly 20 to 30% of the cost to run.
It's bizarre.
It is bizarre. Yeah. But we're seeing it now with GT3. It's, so the white car if we look at that picture on the bottom right, you can see, so that's chassis 26s on the left before I restored it into the factory team colours. And then you've got chassis 11 on the right. And it's just a shame I don't have the aero bits on the front because you could really see the difference there. But so on the right, you've got the early car there, which is, I call sort of a Generation 1 GT3. On the left, you've got 26, which is a Generation 2 car. And then you go to what is sort of now technically a Generation 3 plus GT3 car. And it's actually, you're starting to see the same old pattern emerge again, where GT3 racing is becoming so expensive that it's actually becoming a victim of itself. You've got a lot of people that were traditionally sort of stalwarts of the championship over the last sort of 20 years, well, not 20 years, more like 15 years. And they're shying away from it because here we go to my most recent project, which is the 458. So that, you'd call that technically a mid-generation 2 car. It's starting to get pretty high tech. It's sharing a lot of parts with its GTE or GT2 counterpart. There's a lot of things shared between because they're both built in the same factory at Murcielago, just in the same way that the Astons were both built in the same factory at ProDrive. They were starting to share a lot of the same parts and the same philosophy. So if you look at this Ferrari here, so in 2010, that was roughly a $700,000 car brand new. If you were to go back and buy a 488 GT3 now, they're pretty much a GT1 car in terms of cost. You're going to get one and buy one, bring it into Australia, pay all the taxes, and assemble a decent spares package so you can actually run the car without fear of not completing the weekend if you break a few things. It's still going to cost you, about $1.2, $1.3 million to land one brand new with spares package and pay the taxes. So it's the same thing again. So you've got a class that was actually designed and built with the intention of curing a lot of the ailments that GT1 and GT2 had, and it's become too expensive for the guys that were excited about it. So it's led to the creation of something called GT4, which has started up, probably the thick end of 10 years ago, and it was for a lot of the guys that said GT3 is just getting too expensive for us now. And we need another class that sort of takes it back to square one for GT3 and actually is sustainable. So give it another 10 years and we'll have GT5.
Yeah, actually, it was really funny. I guess, again, that, we're talking about the restricted engines and bits and pieces with GT3 cars and GT1 cars, where it's interesting watching like at Bathurst and stuff doing like watching the GT4 cars being able to catch like the GT3 cars down Conrod, just because of the lack of aero and still almost arguably more powerful engines. Like I think it was the Astons that had more power in the GT4 car than what they did in the GT3.
Look, I don't think they had more, but
similar.
Look, they were a little bit behind because the V12 Vantage was the car that was racing against the V8 Vantage GT4.
Yeah.
V12 Vantage is still making around sort of 610, 620 horsepower, even in its restricted state. And the big thing with the V8 Vantage at Bathurst is they've got almost no aero for what they are. They've got a tiny little rear wing. They've got very little front aero. They're just a slippery bullet. So at a track like Bathurst, where straight line is critical, slippery cars always shine through for 50% of the track at Bathurst. Mountain Straight and Conrod, and it's pretty awesome with that sort of David and Goliath battle. But across the top of the mountain, they just get absolutely monstered. But straight line, they're pretty damn respectable, and they're amazing bang for buck.
Yeah, and again, similar thing, like quite a few of the GT4 cars have still got 5-stub wheels and bits and pieces like that. So I guess, cost of running and pit stops and crews and stuff like that. It's going back to what early GT3 cars were, which is interesting. I guess having driven the cars between the years, how noticeable is that change in development between, some of those early, like the early, I guess, Gen 1 cars and Gen 1.5, and then, up to the later model ones?
Yeah, look, it's a great question. For me, the sweet spot is kind of like the early generation sort of 2 cars. So like a very late DBRS9, like the green Aston. It's got all of the great racing hardware that you really sort of need to really enjoy a proper GT car. So, it had a sequential gearbox. It had a decent gearbox, something, a dog engagement gearbox, so you're not mucking around, worrying that you're destroying synchro rings all the time and things like that. And it looks exciting. Center lock wheels look amazing on any race car. It looks incredible, but it's still relatively easy to maintain. Whereas if you go across to the Ferrari, which is still a pretty easy car to maintain, you're getting all of these extra layers of complication, namely things like paddle shifting. So instead of just a big old stick that you had in the Aston, which is just forward and backwards for up and down through the gears, you've got these paddles, and then you've got to have this pneumatic shifting system and all of the associated electronics that go with that control the transmission, which some people like, but after having driven the Ferrari, and it was the most amazing car, and it was a dream come true to own it and drive it, I still think in my heart of hearts I preferred having an actual gear stick and driving the green car, the late Aston. It was much more raw. It was far more involving, and it is amazing actually having the paddles, how much it freed up your brain space. Instead of having to worry, because the stick in the Aston was quite far away from the steering wheel. So at a place like Winton, which is not particularly well suited towards the Aston, because the Aston's a big heavy brawler, you were having to devote a significant sort of proportion of your mental capacity just managing the gearbox rather than managing where the car was placed. But I kind of enjoyed that challenge. I'm certainly no amazing driver, and I'm no Ayrton Senna, but I really enjoyed the challenge of managing the gearbox and managing this big heavy car that wasn't really perfect. It had no ABS or anything like that, and managing the brakes at the same time as I'm banging it through the gears, with one hand on the steering wheel, and trying to manage the sort of entry oversteer of the back end, trying to become the front end, with one hand on the gear stick and trying not to lock the brakes and all of that. For me, it was a lot of fun. Whereas you jump in the Ferrari, it's got ABS, a special Bosch Motorsport ABS, which is, I think it had 7 different modes for different types of operations. And it was, even though I didn't even become sort of get close to scratching the surface of the car's potential, it made it too easy for me. I enjoyed the Aston being quite a tricky thing, but to take nothing away from the Ferrari, because it was amazing. I jumped straight in that thing and I was immediately fairly quick, which was all the car. It wasn't me. It was just the car was really well set up and very intuitive in the way that you drove it, because I'd never really driven a rear-engine GT car hard before. I'd driven the GT1 Murcielago at Winton, at Phillip Island, but that didn't really count because I was, probably driving it about 6/10 because we're a few days away from loading it to go to California, and we
you were shitting yourself.
Oh yeah, I was absolutely shitting my pants. But the Ferrari, I drove that at probably 8 or 9 tenths, and it just wasn't. It wasn't as hard as the Aston, and I think I enjoyed it being hard.
So that's out of interest. I'm curious to sort of put this to you, that I've been spending more time lately with a lot of people over here that are into racing Edwardian cars and sort of real pre-war stuff. And these are the guys that get out in freezing ashes and drive from opposite lock, and they're sort of they see that era of racing car then versus a 60s or a 70s car, and they almost have the same argument that you've just given about the fact that you've got to drive this and you've got to manage it, and you've got to manage the brakes, and you've got to and they get the fun out of that. But yeah, as a tool for covering ground quickly, obviously the newest car. And then if you add in the whole thing of racing and trying to win championships and trying to sort of progress, you want the newest thing. Is that the same that if you were actually racing and trying to win something, you'd want the 458 where you don't need to focus so heavily on driving it and you can focus on racing?
Just sorry to talk over you there. 100% for sure. I think, if I was going racing and I was, even if I was going to do the state championship here in Melbourne, which they call Mark Sports, they don't actually call it GT3. If I was going to run a GT3 car in that and try and take a trophy away, for sure, the 458 would probably be the better car. But I guess we should totally sort of preface and put a caveat here in that I'm a V12 nut, so I'm probably always going to be to say the V12 was the car that excited me the most. But having that 4.5 litre, naturally aspirated flat plane V8, which I think is still one of the highest specific power outputting naturally aspirated engines in history. Having it right behind your head there, screaming and singing at 9,000 RPM at the shift point, pretty unbelievable. But it's still not. It wasn't quite the
V12. Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, between the generations, I guess as well, was there that shift in the ability for like a one-man band to kind of get on the car and wrench on it and go out to a track day and have a bit of fun and come home?
Yes, look, you could still technically take the current cars and run them, what I call, like, the way I go racing is sort of a shoestring operation where it's just generally me and another, great mate, someone like Phil Hughes, who's the Ferrari expert, or Phil Carter, who was helping me run the Aston, or another ex-Pro Drive guy that lives here in Melbourne, a guy called Aaron Aston. He was helping me run the Pro Drive car as well. You can get away with it just being yourself and one guy. But if you want to do it seriously and squeeze every last drop out of it, you've got to go in the big B-double transporter. You've got to have the engineers coming with you to analyse the data and talk to you about how to shave and squeeze all of those last little drops. But the early cars, if you dumbed the cars right down and you took the data away and just made it so nobody could have any of that stuff, I guess you wouldn't need all of the extra people in the big show. But it's just kind of the way that it's evolved. But I think that, I'll go back to saying, I think the cars from sort of around 2006 to 2010 were the sweet spot before they started to basically become GT2 cars. So if you look at a current 488 GTE, which is the modern, from what I understand, is the modern version of GT2, and you look at a 488 GT3 undressed as a bare chassis, with all of the engine and transmission and ancillaries on show, if you park them next to each other in the same way, they're basically the same car. The way that they're made with all of the exotic materials and all of that, and they're very, very, very high tech things. There's not much difference between the two cars, so it's sort of I've said it so many times in the last little while, but it's sort of gone full circle already. But yeah, this is a cool shot. So this is DBRS 926. Just after we painted it, we brought it in back to the shop from Vito, my mate Vito at Polo Bodyworks, who just painted it. We brought it back to Dad's workshop and we were just starting to prep it mechanically to go racing again, because it had been in storage in Hong Kong it was raced once as a brand new car. So a Hong Kong businessman called Philip Ma commissioned the factory to build it. They did one race, 1,000 kilometres of Zhuhai with the Intercontinental Le Mans Championship. Then the car was mothballed. It never raced again. It did one race. It came second in class. And it sat out the back of Bentley, Hong Kong for a very, very long time near the wash bay, just sitting there getting splashed with soap every day. Crazy stuff. And that's where I found the car. So it had sat after doing one race, but it had sat for, about 6, 7, 8 years, something like that. So we were just going through the processes of taking what was essentially a brand new car, but shaking the dust off everything and making sure it was all good. So there wasn't that much work to do, but it was a lot of fun. I can remember this day. It was a huge amount of fun just going through and seeing all of the absolutely stunning jewellery that Pro Drive had made for them. It's all on show there.
So Jordy, how did you come to have two of them for a very brief period of time? Because I mean, you mentioned the comparison, but obviously you didn't have two for an extensive period of time. It was a sort of circumstance type thing, wasn't it?
Yeah, it happened. It happened purely, you know, like most of the things I do, it organically sort of happened by accident. I just sold the Viper, and I'd seen you guys here in Melbourne doing the story on the Viper. That was my introduction into GT cars, and I loved it, and I loved doing the restoration and had a bit of fun. And somebody wanted to buy it off me, so I thought, right, I'll try something different. And it's what I do, even if the road cars that I own, I just go through my bucket list one by one. And I had the opportunity to buy the white car, which isn't quite the car that I wanted. It was an early spec car. I wanted a late spec car. But it was within my price range, and I thought, well, screw it. I flew to Hong Kong, did the deal, bought the car. I flew home, and 3 days later, I got a phone call. Somebody wanted the car. I'm like, well, I haven't even got the import permit for it. Well, it hasn't even left Hong Kong yet. What am I supposed to do? I haven't driven this thing. So the only other option was to go looking for another car. I said, all right, well, you can, when it arrives here and we've done everything with it, I'll let you buy it, the white car, and I'll go looking for another one. And it just so happened that Chassis 26 was also available in Hong Kong. I didn't know this at the time, but I started looking all around the world, and my search eventually, within a few days, led me back to Hong Kong. I'd only just got back from Hong Kong like 4 or 5 days prior at this point from buying the other car. And I rang up Mr. Ma, and he still owned Chassis 26. We did a deal on the phone. And the next day, I was back on a plane to Hong Kong, like 5 days or 6 days after I'd just come back from buying one. And it turned out they were only like, a couple of kilometres up the road from where the other car was. It was just crazy. Wow. So, yeah, we did the deal on that. I flew home, it was just a day trip to Honkers, and flew home. Went back about a month or two later once we had all the import paperwork set up. And that picture there is the day I went back to Hong Kong. We picked up both cars and we loaded them together.
So that's actually a really good point, like a really good angle for this one, just to see the difference in like even just aero, like
the rear wings. Look at the difference in size.
Yeah,
huge.
Yeah. Were you at that point when that photo was taken, just walking around going, were you excited, or were you just shaking your head going, what have I done?
I was wetting myself with excitement. I could not believe it. Because I'm not from a wealthy background. I'm wonderful. I'm sort of lucky to have a wonderful family, a great wife who supports me with all of this and never questions my crazy harebrained schemes. And a great parent, great parents that have always got behind me, and sent me to the right schools, and been really good to me. But I consider myself to be a self-made person. So to have started, not that long ago, I'm 34 now, and I started at age 18 by restoring an old Triumph that we swapped for a gearbox.
This will be an interesting story in like 20 years' time. We can do like a clickbait kind of YouTube video of like, I started with a paperclip and ended up with a with a Lambo GT1, traded my way through to a Lambo GT1. Actually, that'd be a really good thing to do. I wonder if we could do that as like a thing, like trade my way to a mid 2000s GT1 race car.
Mate, I've got some great stories like that would make your hair curl. Where we started with one car, and we traded in less than a week into something very, very different, with just no money changing hands, just trading of cars. Crazy stuff, but that's a story for another day. But yeah, so getting back to standing here at the freight terminal in Hong Kong with this picture, I was pinching myself. I'd grown up, I was actually at the first time that a DBRS 9 had ever run in Australia. A guy called John Caius imported chassis 2, which just the year prior, so this was 2007, just the year prior, that same car had won the British GT Championship with Barwell. And I was at its first Australian event, standing on the side of the track at Queensland Raceway as a 21-year-old kid, just in awe of the car. So for roughly 10 years later, to be standing there and to be having 2 of the 26 cars built to be going into a shipping container in my own name, was a pinch me moment. So yeah, as I took this picture here, it was really hot. So this building that we're in here is actually about 10 stories tall. So right here in this picture, we're on the 10th floor. So we're right, like it's like a skyscraper of shipping containers. So we're in the 10th floor. It's deafeningly loud because there's industrial machinery everywhere. Because Hong Kong is one of the biggest freight hubs on earth. You can barely hear yourself think. It's about 36 degrees in here and 100% humidity. You get out of an air-conditioned car, and within about 90 seconds, I'm drenched with sweat. It's just basically hell on earth. You're standing there. It doesn't look like hell on earth in the picture, but it was. It was 36 degrees and 100% humidity is unbearable. But actually, I should say it was 36 in the shade. So inside here, it was probably 40 something, and inside the shipping container, which had just been brought inside from sitting in the sun all day, we only go in for a couple of minutes at a time. And these cars, they're almost as wide as the container is. So you actually have to slide over the top of the bodywork to get past them. And I'm not a little bloke. So here I am sliding over, priceless carbon fiber panels by myself with ratchet straps in my hands, these big bulky things with hooks hanging out of them that could scratch everything, all these plexiglass windows that I'm rubbing past.
6,000 euros.
I'm sticking to the cars as I'm getting over them because I'm drenched with sweat. It was literally one of the hardest days of my life.
Did you pack them on your own?
Mostly, yeah. I was very lucky to have a great mate from Honkers, who's a Cathay pilot there, actually, Stewie Radigan. He helped me out, but we were on our own. We had to figure it all out because there's no real dedicated classic car or race car shipping people in Hong Kong. You just, I was using ratchet straps that I'd flown in with. They were my carry-on luggage, and we strapped it in. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
that's pretty cool.
Good fun, good times. Wow, that's just that experience of going to Hong Kong and meeting people of that sort of caliber and living in that world for 12 hours and then shooting back to Melbourne must have just been wild.
It was wild. Philip Ma, very generous man. He gave me his brand new Bentley Mulsanne extra long wheelbase limousine for the day with a chauffeur. I just could not.
Because you don't drive those yourself.
I just couldn't believe it. It's the car business has been wonderful to me. I've had so many amazing friends that I've made along the way, and so many amazing opportunities. And some days were just pinch me days, where you're sort of taken out of your normal existence, and you're put in just the stratosphere for a 12 or 24 hour period, and you just think, like Car Week last year was like that. It was like being in a bizarro world where even the most extreme cars that you would normally go weak at the knees for, that they're mundane and average in a place like Car Week. I'm very, very fortunate to have had these experiences and to have somehow lucked my way and worked pretty hard and ended up that occasionally we get to look through into the window to how this crazy world is.
Well, I think that's the beauty of cars is that you think about sort of the people that are into cars, and you really do have the whole spectrum of you've got us sort of down the bottom playing, trying to scrounge together bits and bobs, and then you've got these wealthiest people in the world flying jets around and and everything in between. And my experience has really been that everyone meets at the same passion, and these guys up flying their jets around are just as happy and just as excited to talk to you about what they're doing as the guy that's scrounging Uplet to get a secondhand tire to bolt in his car to go run it in a dirt thing. It's the whole scheme, and everyone's pretty chill, and the people you get to meet from different walks of life and different professions and different all of this, I can't really think of any other hobby where you'd meet that broader spectrum of people.
Certainly with historic racing, that's 100% true. You could go to any historic meeting on earth, and you'll have a pit lane where you'll have a man who works very, very hard 7 days a week or 6 days a week for an average wage, pitting in the same garage with a guy that could possibly be a Forbes rich lister. It's and their mates. Generally, on a whole, I've never really experienced much sort of elitism with historic racing. Everybody's there doing it together, united by a passion, and to a lesser extent with modern racing. Yeah, it's evident, but definitely with historic racing, the love of old cars and sort of reliving the glory days. Even when I say historic racing, it doesn't have to be. We're talking like old blower Bentleys and stuff, or Jag D types or whatever. Even technically, this car is historic. The best way to go racing, like this DBR S9, it's now eligible for Aston Martin Masters. This car, technically, last month, this car was entered for the Le Mans Historic. Its new owner in Paris was going to run it at the Le Mans Historic. This car certainly comes under the historic racing banner, and it's certainly for me, cars like this are a great way to meet people, to network, to expand my brand, and have just an absolutely inordinate amount of fun. But yeah, just that's a big part of the reason why I'm in this is because of the people. It's led me to meeting you wonderful guys. We've done some awesome stuff together. I never would have met you if it weren't for the cars.
We'd probably say the same reverse back to you more so.
And a lot of the people that I call, amongst my current crop of people that I speak to multiple times a day that are in my sort of inner circle of closest mates, most of them are through cars. Most of them are through racing. Which is kind of funny because I don't really call myself a racing guy. I don't actually like going out and racing against other people. I prefer to race myself sort of as a time trial thing or to sprint in a car because mainly because I'm afraid of people hitting me. It's funny how a hobby, what started out as being a teenager kid going along to state race championship meetings for Mark Sports with my dad's XJS, hanging out in the pits all weekend. And when I go back to school on Monday, I'd be depressed and I'd be looking forward to the next meeting all the time. It was all I looked forward to was going racing again with Dad. Not only did it forge those awesome memories with Dad and things that I'll never forget, and I feel really privileged to have experienced, but it's led me to where I am today. I've had a couple of really great career sort of pathways that took me away from cars, but my love of cars still, I was prepared to give it all up and come back to cars because I was in aviation and I was in engineering and had some great jobs, but even still, they weren't enough to emulate the happiness that cars gave me. Lucky dude, and just shows it pays to love cars.
Exactly. Jordy, we got. Go, Luke.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I guess getting back to GT. The growth of GT3 cars over the years, because it has been, as you mentioned,
a little bit here. Let's get back to GT3.
Yeah. As much, because it's, it's been quite a while now that, basically since 2006 that the series was introduced. So it's had quite a lot of time to develop and grow. And I guess they kind of, they really hit it on the head. Hit the nail on the head, I guess, with that birth of the popularity and the growth of supercar ownership as well, and capitalizing on that. And I guess having that manufacturer support, again, as you said, kind of becoming a bit of a eat yourself type of thing, the growth and the development of it all. But just seeing the breadth of cars that have been developed over the years too, and how they've gone and come and having Mercedes AMGs, having 911s, having McLarens, Vipers. I mean, Bentleys. Who would have thought a Bentley Continental would be up there banging it out against a mid-engine Ferrari?
Can I interrupt you there? So that's definitely what you'd call a Generation 3 GT3 car. You'd almost call it like a Generation 3 Plus. And that's a great example. It's so symbolic of how much of an arms race that GT3 has become, how intense and the technology that's become involved. So that was developed by a company called M Sport, which normally sort of handles all of Ford's WRC program, the World Rally Championship cars, which, are basically silhouettes of Fiestas or whatever they're running these days. There's nothing Fiesta in them. Not even the headlights are Fiesta. So they're used to doing really wild things. So, you start with a base Continental, and by the time you have a Continental GT3, they've dropped 1,000 kilos out of it.
A ton.
A ton of weight between a GT3 Conti and a road car Conti. So if you take a W12 all-wheel drive Continental, like a 2016 model, and you park it on the scales next to a 2016 rear-wheel drive V8 Conti GT3, there's 1,000 kilograms between them. Yeah, and that's
because never in the real world would a Continental GT and a McLaren 720S be even close to each other on a track, on a circuit. Like, it just wouldn't be a thing.
Yeah, and that's where, and something that we probably should have touched on by now, but we haven't yet, but the
parity
formula, so they call it balanced performance, BOP. They've done a pretty good job. Every now and then BOP sort of betrays them a little bit and something slips through the net, and you get a car that's a standout, like an absolute standout at the meeting. Like, for example, the 2018 the 2019, I should say, Bathurst 12-hour, you had sort of conspiracy theories of the Astons sandbagging for a couple of events in the lead up, and then you saw, Jake Dennis's qualifying lap, which was just, it was electrifying. It was just the most amazing lap I've ever seen at Bathurst, just about, when he took pole in the Aston, and that was a car that was just about, it was a month later, that was its last race. It was about to be grandfathered out of GT3 racing, and you got it showing up at Bathurst, probably the most demanding track on the whole GT3 circuit, and absolutely decimating the current cars, even cars that were, relatively new. That's sort of a classic case of how, potentially you can run slow at a few events in the lead up to an event and trick the BOP into running fast. But I should really sort of preface that by saying it's only a theory, but damn, the Astons were bloody fast at Bathurst, and that's kind of an Aston guy. But by and large, as a general rule of thumb, the BOP has done pretty well, and it allows cars like Audi R8s and 720Ss to run against, what you would call the antithesis of a GT racing car, which is a Continental GT.
Yeah. Or even things like the Corvettes, even having those things up in the same league, your mid-engine, front-engine cars, and even didn't they do a Camaro GT3 as well?
Reiter
did one, didn't they?
It was pretty good from what I understood. Not popular, though.
Not popular because, it doesn't really fit the mold. Most people want something a bit sleek and exotic. It's funny, I was actually having a conversation with a guy that's involved in GT3 at a fairly high level a few days ago about these cars. And it's a shame they never really realised their potential, because they actually had the potential to be a really, really world-beating car. It's just, I think Reiter never quite got the response that they were hoping in terms of customers, so they couldn't justify the development or whatever. But Reiter really, they had a great formula and a great package with that, because at the end of the day, the Astons and the McLarens, they're all great. But, at the end of whatever the service interval is on the engines, 15, 20, 30,000 kilometres of racing, you've got to send it back to the factory to be rebuilt. And it's a fairly expensive exercise, even though they do quite a lot of racing, like 20,000, a lot of motor
racing. That's
a lot of motor racing. You get quite a out of the engine. It still costs a fortune to rebuild. But something like the Camaro, it's like a $10,000 rebuild. It's a third of the cost of most of the other cars, or a quarter or even a fifth of the cost of most of the other cars to refresh the engine. And it was relatively simple. It had a Hollinger gearbox, which if you run one here in Australia, you just jump in the car and go down to the eastern suburbs here in Melbourne and buy the parts straight out of the machine that makes them. It was a great formula, and I think a missed opportunity, because that could have been a return to the initial, at the current lap speeds of crazy lap times, the big aero and all of that, but going back to the original aims of financial sustainability, because they're a relatively cheap car to run.
Speaking of crazy GT3 cars, I think I found the most craziest one. I'll just pop a picture of it up.
Oh,
for those
the Morgan Aero 8.
It still has bits of chassis made out of ash.
Amazing. Amazing.
That was a victim of cost. They were very, very expensive to buy, very nichey. But cool car, with its Mini Cooper headlights. Cool car. I love. Anyone that knows me knows I love esoteric, sort of weird, left field, quirky things. Things that you don't expect to be absolutely brilliant, and they are. And that car very much fits the bill.
So, Jordy, what's your take on? Obviously, the other thing I think that GT racing has done for world motorsport is you sort of obviously the kind of concept of making a sexy race series that a bunch of wealthy people want to be involved with and want their friends to come to and want to kind of have this environment, whilst at the same time this pro-am formula of having sort of the guy that's funding the team and then an up and coming pro who might not necessarily have the backing to sort of fund a drive to Le Mans or to the top, but the two working together, and you kind of get this series where you've got the pro-am and you've got the sort of the am funding, but then you've got the pro who actually can go up there and sort of fight for the race win, and the two of them. How many GT drivers that have gone on to success at Le Mans or other sort of, GT categories got their start through this formula of kind of being funded by really passionate enthusiasts that want to be a part of it?
Oh, that's a really good question. I'm trying to think. There actually is a couple of great examples, but they're just not coming to front of mind.
We almost need to ring up Richard again on that one.
Yeah, Richard Crail would be the one if he's watching. I wasn't necessarily looking for names, but it's sort of more the point of how has that contributed to the professional levels of world motorsport that we kind of enjoy. Oh,
look, you look at a guy like a great example is that young fella from Queensland that races for Porsche. What's his name? It's on the tip of my tongue.
Oh, yeah.
He's now a factory Porsche driver. I should Google it. It's on the tip of my tongue. Somebody Google it. I know all about him. He's from a town just near Brisbane, from Warwick. I think he's from Warwick. Mm-hmm. But anyway,
Matt Campbell. Yeah.
Example of a young guy that's not from a terribly wealthy background, getting picked up by Porsche. So he really had to stretch financially to get through the early junior formula, to do Australian Carrera Cup, things like that. Absolutely, was a star. Really shone through. Just achieved results that just were absolutely outrageous for a kid of his years and experience, and was very lucky to sort of catch the sights of Porsche. And he went and did some pro-am racing, from what I understand, in Europe with Porsche, and did extremely well. He obviously had a bit of luck for Porsche to grab him, but I think he's one guy that with the current formula of pro-am and all of that is probably one of the guys that snuck through and really sort of established an amazing career as a result of the way that GT racing is currently. Where you've got Porsche that which and I'm not a Porsche guy, but more power to them for having the money and the guts to put their money where their mouth is and pick these international people out of obscurity that don't have a huge amount of GT racing behind them, and give them a start and put a bit of wind in their sails and push them and send them to the Le Mans 24 hours when they're not really that experienced. And Matt Campbell, he really he really paid them back, didn't he? He said, Christ, he was with Dempsey Racing a year or two ago, and he won GTE Pro-Am, which but obviously Patrick Dempsey and all that were chucking some money in, probably. I don't know the exact specifics of it, but that formula of Pro-Am, gave him a foot in the door and an in to create what is, now looking like a very bright career.
Yeah, no, definitely. I'm sort of, familiar with a lot of guys and obviously the racing it produces. You look at as we're talking with Richard Crail, who we had on last week, who's kind of been quite integral with the 12-hour, but, the finish of the 12-hour for the last 5-6 years has been breathtaking. And it's all these pros racing in pro-am cars up there. And, you end up with these situations where you've got the best drivers in the world fighting tooth and nail in the best cars in the world for overall event wins. And it's worked really well. So, Luke, do we want to quickly run through some questions for Jordy and Got a couple.
You got a couple?
Yeah. Well, I was just saying
I've been
one
keeping
comment
an eye
from
on it, so.
no, that's all right. From Anthony Pesca. It's more of a comment, and I think you've touched on this earlier, but I just want to put it to you. That he's suggesting that it looks like your main criteria when buying a car is that it has to have the most number of cylinders possible. And I guess his question is there a car or a mark that you're intimidated by, like something you wouldn't touch?
Wow. Something that I wouldn't touch. I'm not really intimidated by any cars per se in terms of how complex they are or how much work is required to keep them going. Or I'm pretty willing to bite off a lot more than I can chew. I think cars like the Murcielago GT1 was, and all the XJR-15s and things like that is probably proof that I'm pretty foolhardy and willing to do dumb things. We generally come out on top. But I'm just not a Porsche guy. So a car like any form of 911, you'd really have to do a lot of convincing to try and get me into one. It's just, I think it's mainly my dad. I was raised not to be a Porsche guy. I'm probably going to get a lot of hate for this. I'll preface that. I'll put a caveat there by saying that Carrera GT and any version of 917, 956, and 962 are totally cool. But it's got a flat 6 in the back, not for me.
Not enough cylinders.
Yeah, I think you can probably blame my dad. He's a dyed-in-the-wool British guy and very much a dyed-in-the-wool Jag V12 guy, and I think I can thank him for many things, and I'm not sure if I should thank him for my dislike of Porsches, but I certainly got it from him.
And I guess one final, we've had a couple of comments of people mentioning Phil Hughes, who we probably do need to tap on the shoulder and see if we can get on the podcast at some point. But yeah. So I don't know if you covered when I dropped out quickly, but Phil's relationship with the 458, which was quite pertinent.
So if can we go back to like a workshop photo of the 458?
Yeah, sure. I was just enjoying you in a tux. That's all. The name's Roddy. Jordan Roddy.
That was not by design. We just finished the car, and a great mate of mine was doing a private Grand Prix function on Grand Prix week, and he said, "Look, bring the car along, and we'll display it as part of the Grand Prix function." It was a black tie thing. Yes, so here we go. This is Phil's workshop. So Phil, I was very fortunate to buy the car with Phil. He actually went to Michelotto, where of course all of these amazing Ferrari race cars are built in Italy, and he actually built that car brand new, commissioned by Tony De Felice, who was the original owner of the car. Most people would know him as VRR Tony on Instagram, famous
Vicious Rumor Racing.
A famous Ferrari personality, certainly in the Southern Hemisphere. Phil built that car for Tony. He was sent over, I think, because they hadn't run one yet. So what better way to learn how to run the car than to actually go to Italy and build it with the help of the people that designed it. You learn a lot, and that's exactly what they did. They went and did some testing with, I think it was Andrea Montemini, the factory test driver of the time. Did some running, I think, at Imola and maybe even Monza. There's actually a video of this actual car with Andrea Montemini at the wheel. That guy who posts, he seems to live at racing tracks, a guy called 19 Bozzy on YouTube, and he's got a whole bunch of amazing videos of GT cars running at European tracks. For some reason, he was there that day when this actual car, so this is chassis 3242, and he was there for its shakedown laps with Andrea Montemini, and there's he took video of it, and I only found it on YouTube just the other day. So getting back to Phil, the car came back to Australia with him, and there's a really cool story. I was actually there as a snotty-nosed uni student at its first Australian event at Sandown, running. I went and introduced myself to Phil, who was not long out of running the Prancing Horse Racing team. It wasn't that long prior to that he was running that big famous Ferrari team. To just introduce myself to this intimidating Englishman who seemed to know everything about Ferraris, and I was just an engineering student from university that knew bugger all, and it was great. He actually, he gave me the time of day and showed me over the car, and and showed us all the features. And at the time, this thing was cutting edge. It was literally brand new. It was one of the first to go out of Europe. And that actual car, at that stage, I was still very much a Jaguar guy, and I was even only just starting to develop my interest in Aston Martins. But even my dad, who's a dyed-in-the-wool Pommy V12 nutcase, ripper guy, but you can't really talk to him about anything but V12s generally. Even he was excited by the car, and I said to myself, I'm going to own this car someday. And never really thought much more of it. And then here we are in 2020, and I actually own the car. And to be able to buy it through Phil, to buy it with Phil, and to run the car, and we tidied it up and gave it a bit of a birthday. And Phil allowed me to do that in his workshop, so I did it with his guidance because I'd never worked on something like that before, especially with the level of electronics in the car. It was great to have his guidance, and just even like there's a few little tricks to taking the front bar off it and doing a few things, and just having him say, what, you do this, mate, and you do that, and blah blah blah, and all the tips, and it was great. So to have a great mate,
almost playing apprentice again.
Yeah, well, I'm not too proud to take direction from anyone. If I've got respect for somebody, I'll happily do whatever they say. I've got immense respect for Phil, and I feel very grateful to him for being involved with me with the car. Sadly, I don't own it anymore. We don't own it anymore, I should say. We don't run it anymore. But there he is. That's the geese. We can zoom in the picture.
Yeah, absolutely can.
Zoom
as close as you want.
So now if we go to the right, you can actually see him.
There.
He's actually poking fun at something that I've done. So that stance there. he'll be tearing shreds off something that I'm doing. He's telling me, he's like, you know what, this is not cricket, mate. You what, mate? Yeah, I can actually remember that he was picking on something. I think it was the bonnet alignment, because I just reset all the pin heights for the bonnet, and he was making fun of me. So that's Phil's workshop there. Wall to wall, awesome Ferraris, and it was fun. I probably spent 2 or 3 weeks just tinkering with it there, with a bit of help from Phil, and it was a lot of fun. Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, so and then I guess a final question, what's next? G458's gone?
Mate, I never know what's coming next. I can't, it's probably not fair to say I generally go with what the wind blows in, but everyone asks me this question all the time, and more often than not, the cars find me rather than me finding them. But it's always got to be a car that excites me and interests me, and I've also got to have the financial means to do it. Look, none of this was planned, mate. None of these cars were ever really planned. They found me, and I was just lucky enough to be able to do it. So, I've generally got a story with each of the cars, and with this one, it was quite a serendipitous thing, having me having known the car since new and being at its first racing event and said, well, geez, I'm going to own that car someday. And then for it to actually happen, they're not quite all that serendipitous, but that was quite a magical one. Yeah, mate, your guess will be just as good as mine, because you'd have told me, I bought the car. I actually bought the car. I put some money down on the car on the 4th of February, which is my birthday. Done that on my 34th birthday was pretty cool. But if you'd have told me a couple of days before that, at the start of February, that I'd be buying that, even a few days before that, I would have laughed at you. So, something cool could be coming tomorrow. It could be coming next year. It could be coming in 5 years. I don't know, but it's been a pretty cool roller coaster ride so far. So we'll see.
I'm still just amazed how many cars just seem to pop up. You'd think nowadays, with the way the internet is and social media and everything, that everyone would know everything about where everything is, but it's cool to still see stuff hiding away somewhere, and still barn find-ish, I guess. Almost.
It's funny to say that. Quite a lot of the cars I've been fortunate to buy, people have said, "Oh yeah, I knew about that car. I should have bought that car." Or I heard a rumor about that car. I should have gone and bought it. And My response was, well, you didn't. I bought it. Everybody sort of seems to think they know about these cars and whatever, but no one just seems to sort of get off their backside and go and buy them. Or, because quite often there's a lot of unknowns. You're assuming a lot of risk buying some of these cars. You don't know, quite often you don't know their full mechanical history. So you're assuming the risk when you buy them. But I've never been afraid to roll the dice, and more often than not, we're taking a very educated guess. But yeah, look, it's it's very much some of these cars you're putting your balls on the line, and I love it. I love the thrill of it, the thrill of the chase, and buying them is much more fun than selling them. The thrill of finding these cars and making the deal, because quite often these cars, when I find them, they're not for sale. So getting the owner to understand my vision for the car and what we want to achieve, and quite often these cars have been languishing. So to get the owner to understand that we intend to get the car to a point where it can be enjoyed by everybody again, it generally helps with getting a deal together. But yeah, the finding the cars and the making of the deals is what I live for. It's amazing. It's about as big a rush as driving the cars. In some ways, it's actually more rewarding.
Yeah.
So
yeah. Because I guess it's these cars that sit for this period of time. No one ever intends to leave a car in a warehouse for 10 years. Like, it's just circumstance, and I'm sure they've got their plans and they've got their best visions for it. And next year I'm going to go and do X, Y, Z, but it just doesn't happen for whatever reason. And then I guess you come along and they finally have to accept that, okay, I'm not gonna, it's not just something they've forgotten about and they have no interest in anymore. Like,
yeah, look, for sure. Quite often, with some of the cars, it's taken me years to convince the owners to sell, it's a game of persistence. But then other times, like the R-GT, I learned of the car's existence on a Thursday. I bought it the same day. Well, I agreed terms on the purchase the same day over the telephone, and the next day I was standing on the ground in Japan looking at it. So it can be very different, but you've just got to be prepared to be agile, to move quickly, and to make a decision to stick your neck out on something and back yourself. And sometimes it's bloody frightening because sometimes I'm putting a very large proportion of everything I've ever earned into a car, and you're trusting people on the other side of the world. Sometimes when you put a deposit on a car and you don't particularly know them very well or whatever, you're putting a lot of trust in these people. But I should say what I always say, and it beats flipping burgers at Macca's, so I'll keep doing it.
Well, mate, if you've got idle hands, there's a Boxster over here in Cambridge that could use some Bespoke Motor Cars love. So if nothing comes along for a little while,
I'll think about it. If we can find a 917 engine, a nice little flat 12, I reckon we can stick that, make it into
keep the ear to the ground.
actually, there was that body kitted Boxster I sent you. It was like some weird GT1 hybrid thing.
So Boxsters are cheap enough now that they're into that stage where people are doing slightly questionable things. And there's a guy on Instagram that's paid for a lot of Instagram. It keeps on ending up in my feed, and he's making one try to look like a 991 Carrera, like with the Carrera GT fiberglass dash and the lights. Yeah. So there's that, and then Luke found one the other day, and a guy's it's actually, at a quick glance, if you'd had a few beers, it's actually reasonably convincing. He's built it like a 993 GT1 Strassen version, street version of a 993 GT1 out of a Boxster, and it actually doesn't look too bad until you look at it and you're like, yeah, I get you. But yeah, that's about as close as
that the dude's doing the sort of like shooting brake rear hatch conversion on, and and like that, like a 991 GT3 sort of look to the whole car.
Yeah, I don't mind that.
My dad will probably ring me up and abuse me in a minute, but I don't mind.
That's pretty cool. One thing I wanted to talk about with, I guess, GT3 cars, and I guess that development from early to late. You've been posting a few amazing photos of the GT3 car in of the Ferrari GT3 in just oddball locations.
Yeah.
How did you go like driving that thing around? Like, did you have to like park it and like drop it on that spot, or did you try and drive it somewhere? Because the modern GT3 cars look pretty damn low and very breakable.
Yeah. No, look, I'm very fortunate. I've got some great trailers that you can pretty much position a car wherever you like and drop it on the spot without getting too fancy in terms of ramps and all that. I got one of the trailers is hydraulic, so it can actually just lower itself to the ground, and you literally just pull the car or push the car off, and it's got all. Yeah, there it is. So that's a Nevco trailer. So that hydraulically lowers flat on the ground. They're made in Australia in Sydney. So we used that for the shooting where we call it the autumn shoot. Alex Jovanovic from Freestyle Photography and Ben Galley from B Galley Photography, two sort of masters of their art, great photographers. We were sort of joking that we should do a shoot, and I just sold the car, and it was literally within days of leaving the country. We're here right now. I'm in Kyneton right now at my mother-in-law Julia's farm. She's very graciously taken us in to enjoy a bit of space while we're doing our lockdown. This is where my wife is sort of raised, and as I've sort of grown to marry my wife and have a family and all of that, we've spent a lot of time here, and I've loved the place. And during the first lockdown, we had this idea of I just was driving along one of these leafy autumn streets around Kyneton, around the town where the Campaspe River is, and I thought we should do a 458 shoot here, just as a joke. I thought to myself, and there we were 3 weeks later actually doing it. It's about a 2-hour drive from where the 458's kept, so it was no mean feat. But we did it, and the boys, Alex and Ben did an amazing job of capturing, perhaps one of the more curious juxtapositions of race car photography in recent history, which is a Ferrari 458, which, to use an Australian slang sort of parlance, is lower than a pregnant snake. Grassy field with literally with the autumn leaves falling off the trees around it. It was kind of surreal. It was kind of weird, but a lot of people have jokingly said, like, why the hell would you do a photo shoot like that? And my answer is, as it often is when people question what I do, and it's why the hell not? And because I've got lots of pictures of all the cars I've built, and most of them are sort of in utilitarian, sort of grey industrial backgrounds, or in a racetrack in a pit lane or something like that. As I try and get a memento to remember all the cars with. But we thought we'd do something a bit outside the box, and the timing was perfect, and the location is very sentimental. So we got some amazing shots, and we took it to a big old mansion that is in the area. So that's actually one of Ben's shots. But they took both Ben and Alex took some amazing pics. You should check out their Instagram pages.
Yeah, that's beautiful work.
And F-Style Photography are the two pages. And the boys did an amazing job. They're both, we're very blessed to have some amazing photographers here in. So that's another one of Ben's. But I can't remember. I'm being a bit one-sided here. If you go down a bit, there should be one from.
There's another one there.
I don't know.
That was F-Style in.
There you go.
There's
but look, it was
beautiful.
Yeah, that's one of Alex's, I think. That's one of Ben's. And that's one of Alex's. Just why the hell not? It looked amazing, and we're in the process of looking at setting up a new place to keep the cars. So no doubt they'll come in really handy, printing a few up, and and blazoning the wall.
Awesome, fantastic,
cool. Great. Well,
I think that's a show. Thank you, Jordy. I think it's always.
Jordy's got an international phone call to jump on or something. Got to get out of here.
We got a car in Europe that we're looking at buying today, so I better get on the phone and try and make it all happen. So I better catch you boys later. But thank you so much for having me, and I hope I have on board, especially the tears. We'd love to do another one. It's a great forum that you guys have got here to just not just with myself, but with all the other, just the amazing variety of car personalities that you get on here. It's really cool, and particularly during lockdown when people are looking for, when you see Tiger King being a worldwide smash, that people are really looking for quality content, and you got to step up and answer the call.
Thank you, mate.
Thanks,
Appreciate
Jordy.
it.
Yeah.
So issue 3 Sports Car Safari. It's in the shop, sportscarsafari.com/shop. The magazine is free. Just pay for shipping. Buy a sticker or something while you're there. A lot of people have. So thank you for the support. It means a huge, huge, huge amount to us. So yeah, can't thank everyone enough. And
it makes all the late nights weeding stickers and screen printing shirts and stuff worthwhile to see people doing it and enjoying it. And I guess one of the things for me too, like having people that I haven't met before comment on what we're doing and enjoying it is really heartwarming to see and quite encouraging to hear as well. So thank you very much to everyone who's been supporting us. It's great.
There ain't no drop shipping here. Luke is literally making everything. So
I am the man.
All right, we'll